Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg.
I'm Joel.
And we are here today to do our best books of 2022, fiction only. I chose 15, well, I have a tie somewhere in there, and you have 15.
I have 15.
Fiction only. We'll do a separate video where we talk about nonfiction, and it was a good reading year.
I had a good one. I loved it.
I had a really good reading year. I think last year I only did a top 10 in my best. And you expanded a little bit because I did a second video where I talked about the almost best books of 2022. And I will do that again. But I feel really solid about this top 15. I read exactly 100 books this year. How many did you close out?
113.
Overachiever.
I know. But a lot of mine were short, and I do a lot of audio, so...
It still counts.
It counts,
it's
I know.
It's still reading. It's still time. So he did really well. I did really well. Unfortunately, the way we're sitting, you can only see the top of my Christmas tree and the top of the Santa hat on your shirt. But we figure we're getting all the mileage we can out of our Christmas stuff since the tree is probably going to come down tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's really sad. Jamie is pacing because we're ignoring her. So let's dive into the best list. Do you want to go first or second?
I will go first.
Okay.
So, my first, or my number 15, was You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, by, help me again?
Timothy Janovsky.
Janovsky.
Yeah.
I really liked it. It is a really good book. It was a gay romance. And but it also dealt with some mental illness and some insecurities. And it was Christmas, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
That is one that I'm hoping to kind of start my year off with, since I finished my year finishing up some obligations for like things I had to read. But that is one I would like to read.
So it's a fun read.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I should mention for me, before I get into my 15, is that I have an honorable mention. I think we approached this differently. I am putting Angels in America as ineligible for my top 15 because I'm thinking of it as drama, although it is a fictional story. If I included it, it would be really high up there toward the top. We listened to this together.
Yeah.
So I'm not including it. I'm giving it an honorable mention because it's the only book I read in 2022 that would fit the category of drama. So there's no other list I can append it to. So I want to mention it as an honorable mention here before I get to the 15. Now 15 is where I have a tie.
Okay.
So I'm just going to briefly talk about two of these books. It's Train Dreams by Denis Johnson and The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. And this is case in point, and actually there's another one coming up, why I don't do my year end, my best list before the end of the year. I read this heading into the end. So if I had done my best books list a week before the end of the year, this wouldn't have been on the list.
Right.
I read it just under the wire. And I couldn't decide which one should get 15th place and which one should get bumped off the list. So I'm doing both of them. I talked about Train Dreams a lot in an earlier video this year because I did a sort of 10 years ago look back at the Pulitzer Prize when they were getting ready to announce the 2022 winner. And 10 years ago was... well, now 11 years ago, almost, it was an instance where they did not have a winner, but there were 3 finalists, and Train Dreams was the one I made a case for. So I reread it, and I really enjoyed it. It's a slim little thing. You could dunk this in your coffee.
You could.
You could. You read it, too.
I did. I read it, and I really liked it. It just didn't make my top 15.
Yeah, we had competitive top 15s. And Women of Brewster Place, I read close to the end of the year. And I've been wanting to read this book for a really long time. It's also short. It's like just barely over 200 pages. And I'm glad I finally got around to it. Gloria Naylor is a terrific writer, and I really loved both of them. So they are tied for 15 on my list.
And we're thinking about doing the miniseries of The Women of Brewster Place.
Which stars Oprah.
It's Cicely Tyson.
And Cicely Tyson.
We have seen Cicely Tyson in a stage play, so it's pretty amazing.
We saw her on Broadway when she did a version of
Trip to
Bountiful, which she was so good in. So good in. I'm so glad we were able to do that. That was before we moved to Montana, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad we were able to do that. So those are my 15s. What's your 14?
And number 14 is The Geek That Saved Christmas by Annabeth Albert. Another male-on-male romance, but I was doing a lot of Christmas stuff during the holidays, so I really was getting into Christmas. So it was good. It was it's kind of like Greg and I. Am
I the geek?
No. They both loved Christmas, but they were trying to... one decorated more than the other, so he hired one to help him. But while he is getting into it, he's like, "Oh wow, this is fun," and got a new love for Christmas. So it's kind of like me. I did a lot of Christmas, but when we got together, you taught me how to do big Christmas. So
yeah, we do big Christmas, obviously. So
fun book. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, and that is another one I would like to do.
That one I do want you to read
at the beginning of 2023.
No,
so
I
might start my year with that one. My number 14 was another book that came down to the wire, and if I had done this list a week ago, I wouldn't have read it at all. It's Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. I had a feeling I was going to like it because you read it earlier in the year and you really liked it a lot. I read it for a prompt on the Montana Book Company's reading challenge for Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association winner from the award from the last 5 years. Okay. I had picked a different book from that list and you chose Cemetery Boys. And after you read it and really liked it, I decided I wanted to do that one instead. I'm glad I did. So it is not the type of thing I would usually read. It's a little more fantasy, almost paranormal, but it takes a sort of mythology from Day of the Dead and envisions that this transgender teenager is in a family where the women are sort of healers, the men are sort of policemen, essentially. And he obviously wants to be a policeman because he is male, but it was born as a female. So his family is having a little bit of trouble accepting that and understanding how that would work. And it's a really interesting story about acceptance and being who you are and how we tend to make these things more complicated than they actually are. And I thought it has good mythology without being overly elaborate or feeling like this is way too complicated and unrealistic. So I really liked it a lot. I thought it was well done.
Awesome.
So that's my 14.
Spoiler alert, we'll talk about this again. My number 13 was Angels in America. Greg and I did a road trip to Spokane, which is 3 hours. This is 6 hours. So there and back, it was perfect.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it because I've seen the movie, but I wanted to read the play. And when they did the play, the audio of the play, they all had the characters from the revival doing their parts on audio.
Andrew Garfield, Lee Pace, and Nathan Lane. Yeah, they did a very good job.
Really good job. But I really enjoyed the book.
It was great.
It was hard in times, but I loved it. So I just thought it was really well done, put together, and number 13.
Yeah, if I were including it in my list of fiction, it would be really high up on the list for me. So we're at number 13.
Yeah.
So my number 13 is Love and Saffron by Kim Fay, which we both read.
Yes.
And I listened to it when we were on our way to Italy. Did we mention
we went to
Italy?
Yeah, we did.
We did. We went there. It was great. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I kind of made you read it. I knew you would like it.
Yeah, you didn't make me.
Yeah. It's a really great story. It's set in the early 1960s between two women who start writing each other back and forth. They form a friendship, and it becomes a sort of life-changing friendship. It seems like a little bit of a slate story at first. It does take a couple of letters for the friendship to really set in and take hold, the story to take off. But I found it very sweet and enjoyable. I liked it.
There's a dark time in their period that they depended on each other to get them through.
Yeah.
And I thought that was beautiful, that they built that kind of a friendship through letters.
Yeah.
I personally think letters are a lost art. My friends' birthdays in February, because I'm in February, I will send them a card. I don't do a text. I don't do a phone call. I send them a card.
Yeah.
Because it's a lost art, and I love doing it.
And it supports the post office.
Yay.
Yeah.
And my number 12 was The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. I've loved the movie and I've never read the book. The book is a little different, and really enjoyed the book. I love the heritage and the culture of the stories in here. So it meant a lot to me. There was a time in my life I worked in a Southeast Asian medical office, and it showed me so much about compassion and empathy of how all the family members care for each other. And that's why I find this book so beautiful, is because of the love and care. And they may fight, but there's a deep love that runs through the family. So I really like this. Yeah. So that was number 12 for me.
And that is another book that I really need to catch up on. I've had that copy of that book. Actually, I noticed that when you were holding it, it still has the sticker on the back. And this comes from Borders, which obviously doesn't exist anymore. And I can see the date when it arrived in that store, which is September 15th, 2002.
Wow.
So I have owned this book. I purchased it at some point after that, probably for like 20 years, and I still have not read it. So I need to catch up on that. I have not seen the movie in a long time, but I remember really loving it, and I want to read the book. So that's number 12, right?
Yes.
Number 12 for me is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. This had won the, I almost said National Book Award for Young People's Literature last year, but now it was 2 years ago. What is time? 2021 winner of that category. And I read it in 2022. It was a really great book. So it is set in the 1950s in San Francisco. There are two teenage girls at a high school there. One of them is Asian American. Her parents had both immigrated from China. And she is sort of discovering that she is a lesbian. And there's she has a fascination with this club called the Telegraph Club, where a woman is sort of a drag king, I guess is what you would call it now. But she wants to go to the club. So she and her friends kind of sneak in, even though they are underage. And it's about them finding out who they are, but it's also set during the McCarthy period. And not only are lesbians being, homosexuality is a crime, essentially, but there are a lot of fears of communism. She and her family come from China, so she's kind of caught up in a lot of fears about who she is. And it's a really beautiful story. I really enjoyed it and the way it does. And it's sort of a reminder of where we all come from and how we had to fight for the right to be part of a couple, and how difficult it was for someone to be a teenager and grow up knowing that they probably would have to live in shadows, because she knows a lot of older lesbians that she meets through the club who have to live in the shadows in order to be who they are. And I thought the book does that really beautifully. It is extremely well researched, but I often get frustrated with historical fiction that wants to show off how much it knows. Like, it's really twisting and contorting to put historical detail into the book. This all feels extremely organic. There is a sort of sequel that was published this year, well, not this year anymore, 2022. And I do want to read that. I did not get around to it in 2022, so that will be coming as well. But I loved Last Night at the Telegraph Club.
What's the sequel?
It's called something like A Scatter of Light.
Okay.
And it's set in the present day. And I think at least one of the characters from the book somehow comes into it. So it's not really a sequel, but it sort of picks up on elements from this.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I definitely want to read that. Hopefully this year. We'll see. What do you have for 11?
Number 11 is Kindred by Octavia Butler. I read this for a Montana Book Company Challenge as not a book I would have picked up or even considered, but I loved it.
Yeah.
It was, it has a little time travel element in it, which isn't part of my thought.
It's nothing I would usually read, because I read it too.
You read it too,
yeah.
And you liked it?
It might come up later.
Oh, okay. Sorry. And but I really liked it. It was deeply twisted, but
It's messed up.
I didn't realize the book was published back in
1979.
79,
Yeah.
and it kind of takes place in 79. When I read it, I didn't know that, and it's like, well, it's just odd she wrote this book in 79. But it was in 1979, and somehow, they don't say, but she gets sucked into the antebellum era.
Yeah.
And slavery is going on, and
Civil War has not happened
Civil War
yet.
has not happened. But so here's this modern woman who gets pulled back into time, into slavery.
And she is black.
She's black.
Her husband is white.
Yep. And That's even a big twist too, because the husband gets pulled back too.
Yeah, at one point, and the dynamic of their relationship when they are in the past is forced to change very drastically.
Yeah.
Because
But really good book.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It was very.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, part of what, and I don't want to, because it is going to come up later on the list. I think part of what, I didn't know it was from 1979 either. It does feel like, other than not including cell phones, it could easily have been written now. And I think that is, unfortunately, a lot of the issues of race that it touches on have not really changed or improved all that much. So it still feels very relevant. And we have not had a chance to watch this series. The series is set now.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be interesting to watch that and see how, I don't know if like cell phones will actually play into it, but see what that does.
I enjoyed her writing, Octavia's writing, a lot. So I'll probably do another Octavia Butler book this year.
Yeah. I wanted to do that one because it's not part of a series. Like the one other people recommend is usually The Parable of the Sower, which is the first in a series. And I didn't want to jump into a series.
Right.
And then you read Kindred, and I was like, okay, well, that's clearly the one I want to read. So I went with that. But I don't know when. I don't have a timeline for it. But at some point, I would do Parable of the Sower and just see.
But I knew you would like it, so I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So it'll come up again.
What do you got?
All right. So number 11 for me is The Secret Life of Albert Entwistle by Matt Cain. Now, I really struggled with where to put this on the list because if you asked me what book had the most emotional meaning to me in 2022, it's actually this one, which was a gift from Erica from the Broken Spine. And she called the people at Montana Book Company, and they facilitated a gift for Joel and I after we lost Guinness. And this really helped me kind of work through a lot of that. And I know this is like an emotional thing to talk about for both of us. So it had a huge impact on me, and I really struggled I moved it all up and down my list, and it kind of settled here. But I feel bad that it's not in my top 10 because, again, this is definitely a book that had a huge emotional impact on me this year. So it is about Albert Entwistle, obviously. He has worked for the Royal Mail his whole life, and he started like right out of high school, and now he is turning 65, and he finds out that when he turns 65 he is going to be forced into retirement, and he has led a very sheltered life intentionally, on purpose. He has shut everyone out. He doesn't really want anyone to get to know him. He is an extremely private person, so he realizes he's not going to have anything without his job. And he loses his beloved cat, you can see on the cover, which was really hard to read at that time, but worked through it. And he starts stepping out into the world. He decides that he wants to be more known and change and step out. And the more he does, the more rewarding it is. He lets people get to know him. He finds out that he can be vulnerable. He comes out of the closet. He had dated a man in his adolescent years, and then they separated. So he decides he's going to track that man down. And it's just it's a beautiful story about grief and love and acceptance and all of those things. So I really enjoyed it. And honestly, this helped me get through 2022.
Yeah. The character is very endearing too. You fall in love with this man, and you feel his pain and you feel his joys. And the author has a book coming out this year I'm very excited to read. So I like the author.
Yeah. So that was my number 11. What do you have for number 10?
Number 10, I have Fried Green Tomatoes.
I love this book.
By Fannie Flagg. Again, I love the movie. And I wanted to read the book. And Greg said the book was really good. So I did the book. Book is a little different. But I love the story of the two women and the love they had for each other. Yeah. And in the book, they do come out and say the women are much more in a relationship than what the movie showed.
The movie implies, the book explicitly says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a great story. There is a sequel to it. I think you read it and you didn't like it, so I'm not going to do it. So
yeah, but I love this book.
Yeah. Fun book. There's some recipes going in here too. So
we have
there's a couple of recipes, but we also have we do have a cookbook of recipes.
Cookbook.
So it's a lot of fun. So
I love that book. I'm so glad you liked it too, because it is kind of near and dear to my heart. Also because of the movie, because I've seen the movie for such a long time, and I read this after we moved to Montana, and I loved it. It's just Fannie Flagg, the way she writes is like sitting down with a really good friend who just tells you a story, and you're just completely sucked into it, and you love it.
Yep,
it's great.
And just know that secret is in the sauce.
The secret's in the sauce. Yeah.
Okay, what do you got?
All right, my number 10 is The House in the Cerulean Sea, which you read last year.
I did.
Was somewhere on your top
5.
Yeah, in your top. And I really liked it. So this is another one I really struggle with. It's hard. My top 15 is extremely competitive this year. I read a lot of really good books. So please trust that even though it's at 10 and the Albert Entwistle was at 11 and all of them, I love all of these books. I thought they were really great. This one is about a man who's very kind of like Albert Entwistle. Mm-hmm. He's very repressed, very serious, a big rule follower, which I can relate to because I'm a natural born rule follower in a lot of ways, and can be a little bit stuffy sometimes in that way. So his job is that he is sent to to evaluate the care of sort of magical children, who are sort of in almost like a foster system. And he is sent to an island where a group of children are like basically under hardcore lockdown. Like everybody's afraid of these kids, and their magical powers. So he gets there, and the person who is overseeing the kids is very unorthodox and has a very unusual approach to how he handles these children and relates to them. And like one of the children is Lucifer. The Lucifer. And the approach is that people are immediately afraid of him. He's such a good character too. Such a good character.
Yeah.
And people are afraid of him and think you need to be really hard on him. But the man treats him with love. And speaking as someone, we both have had a foster kid, and you can't help but relate that experience, because the way people talk about foster kids is that they're damaged, they're awful, and this book really just treats them with love and respect, and I wish there was more of that in the world. Right. So it's beautiful. I liked it.
I loved it. It was in my top 5. Yeah. A lot of people recommended it, and I kept saying, no, magical characters.
That's exactly what kept me away, too.
And it did. But these magical characters think of foster kids who all have something different with them.
Yeah.
Our foster kid was transgender, so it was something people don't understand. That's what they're trying to get across in this.
And it made him feel like an other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, God, all the kids in this book, their characters, you just love them.
There are great characters in this book.
There's one, he was kind of an amoeba.
Yeah, like a blob.
And but he wanted to be a bellman. That's all he wanted to do, is be a bellman.
And everybody's like, you can't be you're a blob, you can't be a bellboy.
Yeah.
And it's really cute.
So sweet.
It's really cute. So I really enjoyed this book and would recommend it. He wrote another book called Something with the Whispering Door. And I did not read it last year for a specific reason, because it deals with death, and that just was not a year for me to read something. That I would like to try to get to that in 2023.
And I will get to it. So that's one of my favorite future reads.
Yeah. So we're at number 9.
Mine is Love and Saffron by Kim Fay.
Yeah.
We read this, or you read it.
I read it first.
Yeah. And then you told me, again, 2 women writing letters back and forth about their love for food.
Yeah.
And so, you give me a good friendship over food and bonding, I'm there. So I loved it. So we've talked about it. And so.
Yeah. It's just a really good book. It's very enjoyable.
The book also prompted some listeners to have us read 84 Charing Crossroads.
Yeah.
Which is nonfiction, which I will talk in our nonfiction.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was nonfiction.
Loved it.
And I want to read it this year.
Yeah.
So I'll catch up to it. My number 9 is Kindred by Octavia Butler. So
Yay.
it's back. And we already talked about it, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. But I really loved the writing. It's a very well told story. I think the only thing that kept it from being higher up on the list is that there are some things you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. Like when she first goes back in time, her husband, like people don't treat it as unusual, because if people treated like, oh my God, what happened? The book would have to deal with it, and then it would kind of take up a lot of time trying to figure out like, oh, what's this weird thing that's happening? So instead, the characters are very accepting of like, oh, you're suddenly moving back and forth in time. Okay, we're going to figure out how to work with this. So that, and I think it works for the book, but I think just that dynamic is like the only thing that kept it from being higher on the list. But it's very powerful, really well written, and I loved it. And it was number 9 on my list. So what do you have for number 8?
Number 8, The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. I thought this was going to be kind of a fun, little silly book. I thought it was kind of a kid's book. No. It's this man who kind of is a Hollywood persona. He has to take his niece and nephew for 3 months while his brother goes to rehab. And he becomes the Guncle. And the love that they built going through all the hardship of being torn away from dad, not understanding, but then falling into this Hollywood single gay man's life, they all had to adjust. And it got really serious at points, and how to help the kids deal with a few things. And I thought it was beautiful. I really liked it.
I have a hold on it, on the audio on Libby, so I'm going to read it at some point. I think it's going to be coming up for me soon.
Yay.
I think. So we'll see.
So, fun read. I recommend it.
Yeah. My number 8 is Night of the Living Rez by Morgan Talty. I've talked a lot about this book recently, so if you follow along, I'm going to kind of spare you and not spend a lot of time about it. But if you're not familiar, this is linked stories. But I really like the way Brian at Bookish talked about this book, where he said, don't think of it as linked stories. Think of it as a novel that is out of, not told in chronological order. I think that is a much better way to sort of approach this book. I really love it. It is about growing up on the Penobscot Reservation in Maine, and sort of it deals with generational trauma and abuse and addiction, and is infused, even though it deals with all of those heavy topics, it is infused with love and a sort of optimism as well. And it has a great sense of humor. I am a big fan of this book, and I really want to see what Morgan Talty does next. I listened to this on audio, and then I loved it so much that I immediately called Montana Book Company and had them send me a copy of the book, because I loved it that much.
It's a really pretty cover, too.
It is a really pretty cover. So
when we do the new library tour of Greg's, you'll kind of see that some of the covers are pointed out because they're beautiful. And I think it makes this library outstanding.
I think it does. And this one is not, because some of the ones, it's a little thin, so it would fall over. But I would love to have this facing out. So yeah, but you'll see more of it. That's a tease.
Number 7 from. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you done?
I'm done.
Okay.
So number 7.
Okay, number 7 is Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. We've talked about it.
It's back.
It's a little higher on my list because I liked how the story.
It's a very good book.
Yeah, the story kind of helps the kid's family understand what transgender really means.
Yes.
It's not just a little girl wanting to be a little boy. Mm-hmm. It's actually, there is a little boy inside this body. And because there's certain things boys can do, girls can do, and the boy can do it, they're like, wow. And it's kind of like a light bulb moment. And I thought it was beautiful.
The characters are really well done as well. It's just a good book.
I also I did the audio. The person who narrated it is also transgender, did a really beautiful job. And there's an interview. Did you listen
to the interview, yeah.
At the interview at the end, the author says, I loved how this man handled all these characters.
I think he also said it meant a lot to him that they actually found someone who is also trans and Latinx.
Right.
Because that's the community of the book. So it's just really nice that they found someone who is part of that community.
Yeah. All right.
All right, so my number 7 is Rubyfruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. And this actually ties into Fried Green Tomatoes because it's funny, when I read this, I compared it to Fried Green Tomatoes a lot because of the storytelling. So when you read Fried Green Tomatoes, you asked me, is Fannie Flagg a lesbian? And I was like, I'm pretty sure she would have to be, but I don't know. So we looked into it, and it turns out Fannie Flagg, it's not like official, but she lived with Rita Mae Brown for a really long time. So the fact that this reminded me of Fried Green Tomatoes, it all makes sense. And there are elements of this book that I would say almost made me feel like, well, maybe I should knock this lower on the list. The thing is, the protagonist of this book, who's Molly Bolt, I had to look at the back of the book to remember the name. She is such an indelible character, and I had such a great time following her story and getting to know her that this was just such an enjoyable read in 2022. And for that, I couldn't put it any lower. It had to be here. I really enjoyed this book a lot. And so Molly Bolt is, she's growing up in the 1950s, I believe. And she is a lesbian, and she is this indomitable character who thinks that she can do whatever she puts her mind to, essentially. So she's not ashamed of who she is. She just tries to live her life, and hopefully other people will just be okay with it. And I really enjoyed that. It's a fantastic book, and I'm so glad I finally got around to reading it. I loved it. So what do you have for number 6?
That will probably be in my 2023 read.
Oh, so, I love it.
Yeah.
I bet there's a great audio of it out there,
okay,
too.
Look.
So,
number 8,
number
6 for me is The Winners by Fredrik Backman. It's number 3 in a series of 3. He did Beartown, Us Against You, and then The Winners. There's some controversy on Beartown in the series. In the Beartown, a young girl is raped by a hockey player, and they kind of felt like they really brushed the rape under the table, but I don't think they did. They dealt with it through all three books, but it comes to a head in the 3rd book of the strong dealing with it. But it's a hockey team, 2 hockey teams in very small towns that are just next door to each other. And there's a rape, there's a death, there's a lot of fighting. And getting to The Winners, the 3rd book, where it starts tying everything together, it's really beautiful and incredibly sad. And so much emotions going in there that these towns felt so strongly. They felt more strongly about hockey than they do anything else. And it's kind of how it came around to what the towns had to do to get over this. I mean, there's rivalry and fighting, and it's a hockey game.
Yeah.
So I liked it. It was really good. I've done a lot of Fredrik Backman books and really have enjoyed them. I think last year, Man Called Ove was my top 5. And so I like Fredrik Backman a lot.
And I do want to read Man Called Ove. Uva?
Uva.
I don't know how to pronounce it. But I do want, especially since the movie is coming January 12th, I think.
Next
so
week.
Soon, yeah.
A Man Called Otto in America. So.
Yeah, with Tom Hanks. So I'm going to try to squeeze that in.
Uwe reminds me of my father. And he's this gruff, crotchety old man, but he has a heart of gold.
Your father does have a heart of gold.
He does, but he's a little crotchety too.
He can be, yeah. But
he's my dad.
He's a good guy. All right, ready for my number 6? It is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This is another tiny, tiny little book that you could dunk in your coffee. And I read this. This is one of the first books that I read in 2022 because around this time last year, I got it from the library. Eventually, I found a used copy of it online and ordered it. And I love this book. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize and then shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I think it absolutely deserved that. I haven't read the book that won, but I'm so glad it made the list because a lot of people were kind of wondering if a book that is this short could make it. And I think this is a really good case, along with Train Dreams as well, for how powerful a short novel can be, because in 116 pages, this book really packs a punch, I think. And it doesn't provide any easy solutions, but it's ultimately about trying to do some good in the world, even when there are powerful forces that would rather you not do anything at all. And I appreciate that message, and I love it. So that's Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. All right, so we're at the top 5 now.
Top 5.
Top 5. What do you have?
Okay. I'm going to do 4 and 5 together. I didn't link them together because they are 2 different stories, but they're in the same thing.
Okay.
The first 2 die in the end, and then the second book was They Both Die in the End by Adam Silva. I was told about this by Eric Cervini, who is a doctorate of gay history, and he is talking about it, and I go, this sounds good. And it sounds really dark and deep, but it was fun, but sad.
Yeah. That's why I didn't read it this year.
Yeah.
I want to catch up to it.
But the first book is They Both Die in the End. There's a thing called Deathcast. So you get a call at midnight saying, hey, Joel, you're going to die today. We don't know when, but you are. We're sorry. Goodbye. And so they have to go through the day trying to figure out when am I going to die. But they also go do things that they want to do, like that 24-hour bucket list. Well, so there's an app that they built that if you don't want to be alone when you die, you can log into the app and be with somebody who is going to die. Well, these 2 guys met on the app. They're both gay. They're both going to die. And it's how they go through the day together. Then the second book is the first to die in the end is a little different, but one guy gets a phone call, he's going to die, and the other guy is not going to die. He did not get the phone call, but he has a heart disease and he's going to die. Anyway, period. Doesn't know when. So it's these 2 that they get together and they do go through their day together. I just thought both relationships that both boys had with each other and their friends on the side all came together. I thought the characters were great. I thought the story was not what I normally would do, but was fun. And the second book, which is a prequel of how this whole thing started, who designed Deathcast and why, kind of ties the first book into the second. So I loved it.
Yeah.
So it was a good read.
And I will. I'll try They Both Die at the End at some point in 2023. That's the plan, at least. We'll see how that goes. Because it does sound really interesting.
All right, so there's my 4 and 5.
All right, so now I have 2 to do. All right, so my number 5 is now in November. I have my Pretty Franklin Library edition.
Gorgeous.
I've talked a lot about this one, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It is a novel set during the Dust Bowl about a family and experiencing a lot of hardship, and over the course of a fateful year, they are facing drought conditions and try to make a go of it, and it's hard. It's a difficult book in terms of what happens. It can be sad, but it's a really beautiful book. I read it for my Pulitzer Prize project. I did a whole video about it. I will link it down below. And I'm really glad that I read it. I enjoyed it a lot. And I think this is a book that I hope more people will discover, because it is certainly a lesser known Pulitzer Prize winner. And I think it's just beautiful. So,
is it streaming anywhere like an ebook or an audiobook?
I don't think so. I admit I did not look because I kind of promised myself that for my Pulitzer Prize project, whenever possible, I'm going to read the book. So I didn't really look.
Okay. It sounds good. I want to read it. Yeah. I've done a lot of Dust Bowl stories even last year and enjoy. So I think I would enjoy that. I just don't want to read your pretty book.
Oh, I mean, I did. It is a very pretty book. Let me find an illustration. There you go. But yeah.
It's just too pretty.
Well, you're too pretty. No, I would believe that there's probably an audio out somewhere, but I don't know. I can't say for sure.
Okay.
So that's my number 5. My number 4 is Matrix by Lauren Groff. This is another book that I read in January of 2022, and I had gotten it from the library and then picked up a copy through the year. And I know you read this too.
I did.
And didn't enjoy it as much as I did.
It was good. I really liked it, but it didn't rank high for me.
It's okay. This is another one where it's about a sort of girl boss lesbian nun in the 12th century, and I just loved that so much. So I loved it, and I really enjoyed the story. This is another one that I feel like I just got carried away in the story so much that it had to be in my top 5. I loved it a lot. So that's my 5 and 4. What's your 3?
Number 3, we're coming
It's
back to Back. Secret Life of Albert Entwistle. We've already talked about this, but I just really connected and loved this book. And when his little kitty cat dies, I cried all through it because we just lost Guinness.
Yeah.
And I just felt for this guy, and I think he wanted a lot out of life. He just didn't know how to get it.
And he was worried that people were going to judge him.
I get all those feelings, and you just love the man too.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty cover. So,
it is pretty.
Yeah.
And all of those pictures end up being meaningful to the plot.
Yeah. Well, they look
fun.
like stamps because he's a postage, but all the stamps kind of relate to the story. It's British, the coffee, the bus, and the birds,
lilacs
and
and cupcakes. Like they all actually factor into the storyline at some point.
So I thought the cover was actually really clever.
It's really well done.
All right, number 2.
Number 3.
Oh, sorry.
So my number 3 is, and I really struggled with this because I love this book. My top 3 is insane. Really good books. I think, again, Albert Entwistle is probably the book that really had the most personal meaning for me in 2022, but Don't Cry for Me by Daniel Black is a pretty close second in that regard. So this is a novel in letters. So each chapter is a letter that a man writes to his son. And I usually have a problem with that format because it feels unrealistic, but this makes it work. So each chapter, it's not one long letter, and it's not correspondence. It's just he finds out that he is dying of cancer relatively young. I think he's only, 60?
Yeah.
Something like that. So he's relatively young, but dying of cancer, and he is estranged from his son, who is gay. And he starts writing these letters. Each chapter is a letter to his son, just explaining who he is, how he was raised, and how he became the man that he is. And he's not planning on sending the letters to his son while he's alive. He wants them, when he dies, he figures his son will get the letters. So that's why that format kind of works for me. But it's a really beautiful story, and I think, I'm having relationship problems with my father. So a novel about a difficult relationship between a father and son where, and then you did an interview with Daniel Black.
I did.
With Erica. Yeah. I will have it linked down below. And the way he talked about how it was kind of his way of trying to understand this father. That resonated with me a lot. It's a really beautiful book, I think. I just loved it. It's really good. And I'm really looking forward to the sequel, hopefully, because Daniel Black told Joel that there will be a second book from the son's point of view. And I think that will be fascinating. And I love this book. So that's my number 3. And it hurts that it's at number 3. Any other year, that could have easily been my number 1.
Yeah, but your next 2 are going to be amazing.
Yeah.
My number 2 was Razorblade Tears. I believe Abby from Montana Book Company.
Yeah. Charlie was a big fan as well.
Charlie,
but I think Abby was the one who told you first.
And Abby gets me. Abby knows what I like. She knows how to entice me into books. So a lot of my stuff on here is from Abby. Yeah. But this was, it was a noir.
It's like a neo-noir, I think, something like that.
Incredibly dark. It's like brutal. And these 2 fathers, they don't know each other, but they come together because both their sons, one black, one white, were gay and a couple and beaten up and killed. So the 2 fathers had to come together and kind of find justice because the cops weren't doing a thing. So the cops weren't doing anything. So the 2 fathers come together and they hunt down what's going on. And like I said, it's brutal, but the characters are rough but lovable. So I guess you can say that. And just how two fathers who don't have anything in common with their sons or each other, how they come together and find a way to kind of take care of this. And highly recommend it. If you can do a dark, brutal book, it's a beautiful book, very well written. I like S.A. Cosby. And he's done a couple of other books that I've read that I've enjoyed.
Blacktop Wasteland.
Wasteland. Not as good, but this was stunning and hard-hitting and gritty, and I just loved it.
And I didn't manage to read it before we lost Guinness, and after we did, I was really struggling with the idea of reading a really brutal book. And a couple of people even said that, "Oh, you should read it." Not right now. No. So I think maybe in 2023 I'll do it. Catch up to it. I really struggled with my top two because the way I talked to you about it yesterday, and the way I described my dilemma is, so I have one book that is, if I were thinking like a critic, would have to be my number one book. It's a masterpiece. And I have another book that speaks more to me and my experience of the world and my emotional state right now. And I decided to put the one that kind of speaks to me emotionally in first place. So my number two is Beloved by Toni Morrison. But even though it's at number two, if I were thinking as a critic, there's no way anything would have been better than this book this year. It's a masterpiece. It's a very difficult book. And I did another whole video on this because it's a Pulitzer Prize winner as well. So I'll link that down below as well. It is a masterpiece. It is an essential reading, I would say. It is also, I think, a deliberately prickly book. So whereas when I read Song of Solomon 2 years ago, it was my number one with a bullet. I think there's just that deliberate prickliness kind of didn't give me that emotional connection to the book that I had with Song of Solomon. However, again, it's a masterpiece. And it's just a great book. And I'm in awe of Toni Morrison's power as a writer. So that's my number two. Yeah.
One of the challenges on the Montana Book Company was a author that intimidates you. And I forgot who I did. But I think Toni Morrison would be that author for me if I was to do this again. Because I really want to read one of her books, but I think it does intimidate me.
So I would say she reads her audiobooks. And she has
the voice.
An amazing voice.
Yeah.
So I decided I wanted to read her books in print first because she really deliberately puts a lot of thought into the words. So I wanted to have that time with the page. However, especially if you're intimidated of Toni Morrison, I would say go to the audios because her voice is absolutely incredible. And The Bluest Eye would be a good one.
Oh, okay.
It's her first book. You do have blue eyes. Oh. I love your blue eyes. And it's a short book. It's brutal. It's brutal. Okay. All of her books are brutal. But that's my recommendation to you. And if you are in the same boat, that would be my recommendation to you as well. It's because her voice is incredible.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I would say a lot of my books, and Greg and I talked about this, is how I ranked mine. Mine were ranked on how it impacted me emotionally. Maybe it's not the writing, maybe it's not the literary side, but how did I react? And so all my books are up there because they all grabbed me, and I just did it. And my number one is Don't Cry For Me.
And like I said, any other year, this would have easily been my number one.
Yeah. I did get to interview with Dr. Daniel Black. He is incredibly charming, just big personality, just a beautiful, beautiful man. And I had a lot of fun talking to him and asking some questions. Yes, there's going to be a sequel, and he's very excited about the sequel too. And the sequel is the boy responding, not reacting, not responding, but reacting to the letters. The son is gay, and he probably doesn't know why his father was the way he was. Daniel Black pulls a lot of inspiration from Alice Walker and The Color Purple, and that's tied into the book. And you kind of feel it and read it. The letters are like in the color purple, which is written in letters as well.
Yeah.
So they're short and to the point, and I highly recommend reading this. If you haven't, give it a try. It's beautiful, inspiring, and if you do have makes you think. And if you do have a little problem with dealing with a friend, father, anybody, just know what they've gone through.
Yeah.
And that you can't judge them unless you know what they've done in their life. And he does that. He's not looking for an apology.
No.
He's just saying, I'm this way because this is what I've been through.
Yeah. And it is interesting because in the beginning of the book, he's a very emotional child and kind of a loving child. And that is not beaten out of him, but he is taught over time not to be like that. And it's sad. It's ultimately, it's almost like a tragedy because he had all of those qualities in him and he was told that's not how you be a man.
Right.
And I love it. It's a really great book. I hope more people read it.
Yeah. I highly recommend reading it. Please let us know what you think if you have or want to read it or are going to read it. Just too much. So, I'm reading about fathers who are dealing with their kids and there's that generational gap and you don't know. And I just think both these books are beautiful I know my father would go to the end of the earth for me. And these fathers do. And it's beautiful. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah. I don't think my number one is going to surprise anybody who's been watching my channel recently. It's Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I think the empathy in this book is really staggering, and that's one of the things I really love about it. Barbara Kingsolver is, I believe she's from Appalachia, and this is set in Appalachia. It's the story of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, set kind of in the present, but really in the 90s into the 2000s in Appalachia. And it's just such a really good, well-told story. I haven't read David Copperfield, but you can feel Charles Dickens's thumbprints. I've read other books by by Charles Dickens, and you can feel his thumbprints all over this. And there's a really beautiful letter in the beginning of the book where she talks about her inspiration. And she just did an interview with NPR as well. It was on NPR's Book of the Day podcast, and she talked about how she kind of got stuck when she was forming ideas for this, and she went to the Charles Dickens house, which you can actually visit, and I think you can actually stay there, and she sat at his desk and got the inspiration to make it work and do it. And this really feels like a labor of love. It's a big book. It has a lot of story elements. There's a lot of tragedy in here. I saw a review online that's like a lot of melodramatic things happen at the end. And it's like, yeah, but that's his life. Think of our foster son and the things that he went through in his life. You'd call it melodramatic. And it's like, oh God, a lot of people died. It's like, yeah, it does. It's tragic. And it's about a lot of really important political issues, but it doesn't deal with them in a heavy-handed way. You could actually read this book and think it's just the story of the kid and not really think about what Purdue Pharma and other pharmaceutical companies did with the opioid crisis that we are in now. And it's timely because I think 2022 was the deadliest year for the opioid epidemic. And this is sort of about it's set deliberately in that time period because it's when that all started. And it's about how people in Appalachia have been neglected. And it's about the foster care system. It's about how they've been taken advantage of with tobacco and coal mining and then the opioid crisis. And this version of David is named Damon. His nickname is Demon. Because it's in Appalachia, she gets sort of some of the Dickensian names by having them be nicknames. So his nickname is Demon, and he has red hair, so Demon Copperhead. And it's just a really beautiful book. Very empathetic. I've been a big fan of other works by Barbara Kingsolver in the past, and I think this is just a tremendous book. I really loved it a lot. So I struggled with whether or not it should be 2 or 1 with Beloved, but honestly, you really can't go wrong with either book. I'd say both of them are sort of essential American literature, and I really hope this wins the Pulitzer Prize next year.
And really, out of 100, they're both just up there. It's kind of like who wins first or second place of Great British. They're both going to go off and do something really amazing.
Yeah, you can follow both of them on Instagram and get the same content either way.
Yeah, so
at the end of the day,
good list.
So I think yours is good too.
I had a good year, and I really enjoyed it. My goal for 2023 reading is going to be a little bit more challenging. Some classics. I have Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn right now. And so I'm going to start doing some classics and some challenging.
And I'm still kind of thinking about what I'm going to do this year. But 2022 was a really good reading year. The rest of the year kind of sucked. But the reading year was solid. And I hope that continues in 2023. But either way, thank you for coming along on this journey.
Thank you.
And talking about our best reads of the year with me. So we will both be back to talk about our nonfiction best list. I'll talk about my almost best books in a different video. And I think in my next Friday Reads video, I'll talk about the worst of 2022. Because there actually was not a whole lot of negative. I didn't throw anything across the room this year. I did last year, not this year.
Last year, yeah.
Last year, yeah. Oh, well, now 2 years ago. Last year is 2022 now. What is time?
Yeah, I know. I had one book that I hated, but
that sounded so weird.
I muscled through it and got done with it.
You did. So that's our best books of 2022. Stay tuned for more. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I know this was a longer video, and as always, I just appreciate that time. And we will be back. Until next time, happy reading.
Bye.